Hello, I'm the Rubber Von Ducker, and today I'm going to be speaking about Champageddon, the new apocalypse for this month, which is basically the situation I think the Championship is in this transfer window. Obviously, I've done a previous video about COVID and the Premiership transfer window. This isn't one I intended to make, but after I had a little look at the Championship, I thought it's probably the more interesting, more dynamic situation, because obviously with the Championship clubs there's very little TV money, and that's what the Premiership clubs are reliant on this season, as many European clubs are. And that means that the Championship is going to suffer more because they're only getting, 8 to 15 million in TV revenue if you're lucky. So it looks like your clubs, the Championship clubs, the ones that are really going to suffer. It doesn't help that a lot of these clubs are overspending. In fact, it's so bad I've actually created a list which I think contains half the Championship, where I would argue that your club is not in a fit state to purchase any players this season, and I wouldn't be surprised if some of these clubs don't actually fail this season. So the first thing I'm going to show is the list, which is going to contain the teams who I think are in financial difficulties, if we're being honest. And when you see some of the wage figures against income, I think you'd be quite concerned as well. And then after that I will go through the clubs who aren't in such a financial state. However, I wouldn't suggest necessarily any club spending heavily this transfer window. One, because you're not going to have the income till the fans come back, and two, because you don't know which other clubs are going to be there in some respects. Now hopefully it won't get that bad, but I mean, looking at some of the figures, if those debts aren't owed to the owners, then I can see them being called in. So obviously, as I go through the list, I do say repeatedly that you won't be buying players. Obviously, that depends on the owner. If the owner finds a way to shove an extra 20 million debt on the club, then maybe you will. But I think that's, as I say in the case of Ipswich, I think that's a terrible situation to be in. Obviously, the other possibility is they may raise funds by selling off the ground, as a lot of clubs have done so far. Derby and Villa, my club. So, a little bit different to the Premiership, but what we're going to do is have a list. If your name's not on the list, then you'll have a section, with the exception of Huddersfield, who have somehow managed to miss out, but effectively you're getting parachute payments, so you should be in a better position than many, depending on how much you've reduced your wages since you came down from a Premiership. Unfortunately, I also don't have figures for any clubs coming up from League One, so teams like Coventry and Wickham, unfortunately, I can't do you either. If your club's not on the list, to find your specific club rather than having to go through them all, just look for your badge. So I've done it alphabetically, with little badge first, then roughly about 2 minutes of talk on your team. So if you see a badge that's alphabetically after your club, you've gone too far. Obviously, it's interesting to see all of the club's finances, as it may give you a better strategic idea of how the teams may act in the transfer window. And finally, there is my thoughts after all of the club reports. If you are interested, or if you're wanting to watch my descent into madness, obviously I did the research on the fly, so I wasn't quite expecting what I was to find. If you do want to see if I make it through to the end, then hang on for my thoughts afterwards, where I consider what's actually occurred here. Right, so on to the list. Top of the list, Birmingham City, revenue 23.3 million, wages 32.8 million, net debt of 94 million. I do feel sorry for Birmingham City. They've had several terrible owners over their history. In fact, the best ones were the Sullivan and Gold consortium. Since then, they had a owner who is now in prison, is currently in prison, has been on trial during a period where he owned the club and was in the Premiership. Probably less said about that the better. Blackburn Rovers, revenue 15 million, wages 32 million, debt 14 million. I mean, if it wasn't for the fact that your wages are twice your total revenue, you may be in a good position. However, that revenue is going to diminish considerably, I suspect. Luckily, you don't have much debt, but these wages need to be reduced. Brentford, revenue 15 million, wages 35 million, debt 57 million. Again, if this debt was zero, this wouldn't be a major problem. The strategy of Brentford has been to bring in players, develop them and sell them on. So in that kind of scenario, they're making good money. They'll probably make a good 50 million again this season. In the short term, it doesn't look terrible, but I don't know if that practice will continue given the scenario in the Championship. Obviously, though, if they can hold on to a relatively good team and reduce that wage bill by just selling a few players, then that will change things. I think as well, because this is before they've reported the sale of Villa and Morpay to Brighton. Hopefully this debt should go down by about 30 million, so if that's the case, they could quite easily come off the list. They're probably the most likely to come off the list. Bristol City, revenue 30.2 million, wages 30.6 million, net debt 69.9 million. Again, I have no idea how this debt's been created. Guessing it's probably players. Derby County, revenue 29.1 million, wages 46.8 million, net debt 50.8 million. Again, heavily over on the wages. Revenue is going to decrease. Yeah. Ipswich Town, revenue 18 million, wages 19 million. This is a season they got relegated down to League One. They're still in League One. They've got net debt of 96 million. I don't even know. Well, I do know how, because they spent 6.8 million this season. They got relegated on players. You were clearly already 90 million in debt. Why did you pay 6.8 million on players? Put out youth players. Accept you're going to be relegated. Take the cash. Take what cash you can. Hope one of those youth players does an amazing job. Becomes £10 million. Sell him. You can't be buying players when you're that much in debt. I don't even care if the chairman owns that debt, which I'm guessing they do, because I think someone would have called it in by now. What happens if the chairman has a stroke? What happens if he gets hit by a bus? Are the executive of the estate going to want to keep a football club like this? Are the receivers going to come in and go, yep, well, that's not worth anything? Middlesbrough, revenue 56 million, wages 40 million, net debt 105 million. Just out of the Premiership, I believe. Still getting parachute payments. Trying to reduce the wage bill, so they're trying their best. But this debt, again, 105 million. It needs to be lower. 50 million tops, and you're a big team. You're going to have revenue, bigger revenue from great gate receipts and commercial activity than most of the others in this list. Hopefully it can be sorted out. Millwall, revenue 18.4 million, wages 16.9 million, net debt 92.6 million. Just like Ipswich. I mean, they've stayed up. Maybe they've got a chance. Nottingham Forest, revenue 25 million, wages 36 million, net debt 59 million. Same old story. Preston North End, revenue 14 million, wages 20 million, net debt 41 million. Reading, revenue 21 million, wages 41 million, net debt 67 million. Well, it's probably in the 80s by now, because you've got a 20 million shortfall. Stoke, revenue 71 million, wages 58 million, net debt 180 million. I believe they've just come out of a Premiership, so their revenue's boosted by parachute payments. Also why the wages are high. I would consider that net debt high even for a Premiership club outside of Europe. 100 million if you're not in Europe, otherwise, you know, the sky's the limit if you're in Europe, but outside 100 million. Still got parachute payments to go. I dare say they probably have sold further players in the following year. Sunderland, revenue 63 million, wages 46.8 million, debt 30 million, and that's only recently been released. For a while it was unknown, which was the primary reason for being on this list, was that we didn't even know what your debt was. Turns out it wasn't so bad, only 30 million. Only 30 million. However, they have been relegated to League One, so their revenue is going to be cut. They've probably still got parachute payments to come, but they can't find a buyer for 30 million to pay off for debt. They'll probably sell you the club for $1 million if you pay off the debt for 30 million. Sunderland are a big club. I don't know what's going to happen to them. But when you consider there's Millwall and Ipswich in a worse state than that, it doesn't breed much hope for the future. Barnsley 2018 financial results. This is for the season where I believe you're actually relegated but bounced back up, if I remember. Your revenue is 14 million, wages of 10.6 million, so you've got a 3.4 million surplus. You had a net spend of 1.5 million on players, which is quite impressive. And you've got a breakdown of 3.6 million match day income, 8.2 million broadcasting and 1.2 million commercial, with other covering 1 million. Your net debt is 0, so that's quite impressive. So you're in a very good financial position on this basis. Obviously, next season you should have a little bit more. I think you get a little bit more broadcasting money, but you're going to lose a match day and some of the commercial. But you should be able to survive. Doesn't look like a great time to buy new players, but you may find some bargains, especially when you're doing this kind of trade. Best thing I could say would be spend wisely. If you can get a Premiership club to buy players, great. If it's Championship, ask for the money up front. You should survive financially. Obviously there is a burden that if any other clubs go under and they owe you money, you may struggle there. So it'd be wise to keep a tight eye on the purse strings. Hopefully though you should stay up. I think the chaos for other clubs may send some of them down, so I think you may stay up even retaining your squad. AFC Bournemouth, revenue 131 million, wages 111 million, so roughly a 20 million surplus there. Obviously this is for your final year, well not even the final year, for 2019. You've since been relegated, so obviously your revenue is going to drop. Looking at the revenue, you've got 5 million match day, 116 broadcasting and 10 commercial. I'd expect you to lose most of the match day income this season. You're going to see the broadcasting reduced, but I reckon you're still going to get 80 to 90 million. And then commercial 10 million again. I'm working on a 50% basis, so about 5 million there. You should have enough to cover wages, especially now Nathan Ake's moved on and brought in 40 million to pay down your debt. Other sales can obviously bring the wage down and bring the debt down, so you could be in a position to buy players if you so wish, to strengthen the squad. As I'm saying on pretty much every video, I don't know if that's worthwhile, because I think so many Championship clubs are going to be facing administration. Some of them aren't going to exist anymore, so it might be wise to have a buffer. Equally though, there are going to be some bargains, and I can see Bournemouth, if it sees a bargain, going in and buying them. So maybe some purchases, but I think the focus will be on sales. Cardiff City 2019 financial results. This would be for their Premiership year. So they've got revenue of 125 million, wages of 54 million, so nice big buffer there. Breaking down their income, they had match day income of 8 million, broadcasting of 107, commercial of 10 million. Obviously those figures are going to change because they've already spent one season in the Championship. They're now going to be spending, I believe, another one in there. So last season they probably got 90 million, or probably 80 million. They're still going to have made a profit off the broadcasting. Question is, did they buy and sell any players? I can't honestly say, but if they did, that will obviously change the metrics. They've also got a reasonable amount of debt. Obviously, if they use some of the broadcasting money they didn't spend to bring down the debt, then that figure should drop for the next financial results. And hopefully then they should be in a relatively good position. Obviously, they're going to get another year of parachute payments, so they should be covered for this year, or at least partially, depending on what the wage bill is. So they should be in a relatively good position to crack on. They may be in a position to take advantage with a few cheap transfers. I think, as with everyone, the wisest thing is make sure you have a buffer. Hopefully, when the match day money comes back in, that'll make a difference, but until then, just make sure you have a buffer. Hull City's 2019 financial results. Revenue 48 million, wages 25, so a nice big buffer there of 23 million. They did have a net spend on players, so 2 million went there. Breakdown of income is match day 6 million, broadcasting 40 million, and commercial 2 million. The broadcasting figures will have been pumped up with a parachute payment, so that will have been reduced, which may change the situation considerably. They do have 50 million debt, but they've got 10 million cash, and that's a current net debt of 40 million by the 2019 results. Obviously since then they've sold Jared Bowen, which is another 20 million, so that might reduce the debt down by another 20, so that would be livable debt, wouldn't be bad at all. Broadcasting revenue is going to be reduced, so there's question marks about whether total income will match the wages, but again, some players have been sold, and now that they've been relegated to League One, I expect more to follow. Slight concern over Hull City, because obviously dropping down to League One with 25 million of wages isn't ideal. I would hope they'd come straight back up, but things are difficult, I know, in Hull at the moment. Whether the chairman is willing to invest, or whether he's just going to let them fall further, we can't say. I would hope not. Norwich City's 2019 financial results. We've got revenue 34 million, wages 54 million, so a 20 million deficit. Transfers in 4.9 million, 5 players, out 33.9 million, 4 players, so well, it's saying a net spend, but if they're out, surely that should be a net credit. So I'm presuming they made 29 million. Yeah, they would do, because otherwise it'd be a minus figure. Income from match day 10 million, income from broadcasting 11 million, and commercial income 13 million. So only 11 million for broadcasting. Obviously they came up into the Premiership, so they'll have parachute payments, so you're probably looking about 70, 80. Wages I don't think will have gone up that much. They didn't buy heavily, they bought a few players, but not many. Possible sales might help as well. I think they're in an interesting position, because they didn't buy heavily. They may be able to buy 1 or 2 players, but equally they may be able to hold on to their players and come straight back up. So I don't see that Norwich necessarily have to sell, but I think they might sell. I think they might sell a couple of players to ease up the revenue situation. They've got relatively small debt, 22 million. They should be able to cope with that. I think it'll be interesting to see if they do come straight back up. I think there is a good chance. especially given the state of the Championship. So I think positive season for Norwich next season, but possibly not much movement in transfers. Maybe a few sales, but doubtful they're going to have any big players coming in. Although they may pick up a bargain or two they see here or there in the Championship, so I wouldn't rule it out. QPR 2019 financial results, and finally a club that looks on the figures fantastic. Revenue 34.6, wages 24 million, so a 10 million surplus. They even sold a player, so bringing in 4 million. Net debt is basically net cash. Apparently they've got 56 million cash, net debt of 3.5 million. This should be net surplus 53.2 million if those figures are correct. Now the income is 5.4 million for match day, broadcasting 22 million, and commercial 5.2 million with other of 2. The one thing I would say is that broadcasting figure is extremely high, I believe due to the fact they had an FA Cup run. So I think that is slightly bolstered, and that may change the outlook if they hadn't had it. Equally, I know they've been under financial fair play issues, as is suggested by the title there. I would say though that this is probably the club currently in the best position if this is a true reflection of their finances. I think there's also a possibility that they've got a player that may be sold for reasonable money or even good money to the Premiership, and to be honest, QPR seem to be, if this is the state of their finances, they can afford to ask big money unlike other clubs. So if they get that big money, there's going to be a temptation to spend, and I can see Queen's Park Rangers being one of a few Championship clubs that does spend this season, depending on where their finances currently are. If they do, they're going to be picking up cheap players, probably young players. They're not going to be spending big money for people, and that may be very much contingent on them selling that one player. But financially, they look pretty strong. Obviously, there has been issues with fair play. Hopefully, they put that behind them. They could be a contention for promotion to the Premiership, I think, this season, because they're not going to be worried by off-pitch results. So, yep, good for Queen Park Rangers. Rotherham 2019 financial results. Revenue 13.9 million, wages 7.8 million, so a good 6 million surplus. No spending on transfers. We've got the income breakdown to be 2.6 million for the match day, broadcasting 7.7 million, and commercial 3.5 million. Now obviously there's almost enough there just to cover the wages from the broadcasting, so that's good for survival. However, Rotherham did get relegated this year to League One, and then came back up, well, will be back up in the Championship for the coming season. And I'm beginning to see a pattern here. If you look after your finances, you get relegated. If you spend wildly, you don't get relegated. So I guess I see the motivation for this behaviour, but it's just going to lead to so many failing. But back to Rotherham, and they've got very little net debt, 2.7 million. You might consider that relatively high for what they've got in revenue. I think it's fair enough. They should be able to survive financially. I don't expect them to be spending heavy. I think the manager or the owner knows keep a tight finance. We'll have to yo-yo, and eventually this situation's going to break, and I think we're now at that point. So the owners who have been financially sensible may finally see an end to the situation that appears to be in place. Swansea City 2019 financial results. Revenue 69.4 million, wages 50.3 million. We've got the match day breakdown of 7 million, broadcasting 51.7 million, parachute payments from when they were in the Premiership, commercial 5.6 million, and other 5.1 million. Obviously, looking at that, they do fit within their current broadcasting revenue. However, obviously that's going to be reduced because I think they've come to the end of their parachute payments, or maybe they've got one small year left. They've been selling players, and obviously they've sold more since then, including Jordan Ayew to Crystal Palace. However, I'd be concerned that they've still got relatively high wages, because I believe Andre Ayew, is the brother of Jordan, is still there on reasonably high, or very high. I think he's on more than Grealish is at Aston Villa. He's on very high wages, so I don't know how much longer that can continue. Hopefully you'll be able to sell him, or maybe his contract comes to an end and you can get a reduction. But with low net debt, or in fact cash surplus of 1.6 million, there's room to manoeuvre. Again, I'm not going to be suggesting that you should be rushing out and buying players. You've got a bit of lee room to do so if you see some bargains. At least you will have if you've reduced that figure down. If you can create a stable income to wage ratio, then you could survive quite easily. Equally though, if you don't, you could be on the list with just about everyone else. Watford 2019 financial results. We've got revenue of 148 million, wages of 84 million, so a good surplus, over 50 million pound surplus there. And when you look at the match day income, they've got 9 million coming in from match day, 124 from broadcasting, and 13 million from commercial, and 1 million other. Obviously, if they did lose, even if they lost both the commercial and the match day, they should be fine. Obviously, though, they were relegated, but even being relegated, I would think that they're probably going to get about 90 million, so again, they should be fine on the wages. That's obviously 2019, so if they did buy in some big players on big wages within that period, then they may well need to sell. I suspect they will be looking to sell, because obviously they do have Delafeu and a few others who probably are on big wages, and it would be nice for them to get a cushion. I suspect they'll probably sell, and they might even buy up one or two replacements if they see some cheap bargains in the Championship. If they do hold together a team, then they could be straight back up. Don't really see them having a problem this year with the parachute payments, but if they don't turn over their staff and they don't get back up, then they're going to be in a very tight situation. So realistically, I see them selling, maybe buying a couple of cheap replacements. I don't see them spending big at all, and obviously a relegated club rarely does. Wigan Athletic 2019 financial results. And we've got revenue of 12 million, wages of 12 million, with a net income of 1.5 million from transfers. Got matchday income of 2.4 million, with broadcasting revenue of 7.7 million and commercial income of 0.8 million. This was a season they just came back to the Championship after heading into League One, the final year of Mr. Whelan's ownership of the company. Had limited debt of 21 million, which is well within a reasonable range. Relatively well run club, which begs the question, why did this club go into administration in the last season? And for that, you're going to have to go and watch an FNG video, because he's made a video, the biggest football scandal you've never heard of. It's eye-opening, it's disgraceful. I don't know what to say, Wigan fans. It's ridiculous that you were relegated. It's ridiculous that you were in administration, realistically, if these are the figures. And even if they're not, someone must have laden your club with debt to get into that situation. So the EFL's fit and proper test is a joke, an utter joke. And Wigan is a proof of that. I mean, the whole of the Championship, quite frankly, is a proof of that. But Wigan has just taken the cake, really has. Go and check the video out. FNG, he's made a brilliant video on it. Go and check it out. Bring yourselves up to date. Wigan fans, don't know what to say to you. I wish you the best for the future. I hope somehow you get new owners. But my understanding is that it's still owned by the same company. I just don't know what to say. So maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's something I'm not seeing. But to me, the future looks terrible for the Championship. And if those Championship clubs fail, if they're owing League One clubs money, where do they stand? One would hope that the situation is better in League One, but I'm not looking. I don't want to look. The state of the situation is incredible. One can only conclude that many of these owners are not what I would call fit and proper. But then whoever's lending the money for these clubs, and my suspicion is it probably is the owners, because I've seen a massive trend in that recently. Whoever's lending them can't expect to get their money back. You know, if it's banks, it seems like recklessness on the side of banks that are lending them this money. I mean, how Ipswich gets 100 million debt is just beyond me. Just beyond me. They've got no players to show for it, little assets. The same is true of Charlton, who I haven't mentioned in this, but Charlton are in a similar situation. They're a bit further down the road because they're actually trying to produce youth players to sell to pay off the debt. But unfortunately, they just got sold for £1 recently to new owners. And they promised to put money in, but no money seems to be forthcoming. And the Premier League will say, oh, it's nothing to do with us, but really, it is. Because if people become owners of Championship sides, and they haven't gone through the same fit and proper test as the Premier League, then the fit and proper test is meaningless. You just buy in the Championship, pay into the Premier League, there you go. I'm willing to bet that there's no real checks when you go up. Is the Premier League going to tell a club that's promoted that they can't come up to the Premier League because their owner isn't good enough? Are they going to tell fans that, oh, doesn't matter whether you've put yourself in debt to get there, your owner's not fit and proper, can't come in? No, they're not. And you know they're not because they never have. They've never said no. There's never been a case where someone said, no, you can't be promoted because you're not good enough. Or even, you can be promoted, but you have to sell the club. Never happened. So, I don't see that about to happen. I don't see how they can do that. So, the idea that fit and proper tests are just run by that select league, it's pointless. So, yeah, if you buy a Premiership club, you probably have to go through a different set of fit and proper tests, although no guarantee. But if you buy a Championship club, you go for the EFLs, and the Premiership just rubber stamps that if you get promoted. I mean, the whole situation is ridiculous. I think it's got to come to an end now. I don't understand how these clubs have got into such debt. I can only presume it's spending on players' wages, being in deficit for year after year. The Championship, and I suspect this is probably true of a number of clubs in League One, possibly even League Two. There's no test. There's no test to see if these people are fit and proper. There's no test to see if these people have money. There's no test to see if these people have been bankrupt. There's just no test. We claim there's a test. There's no test. So yeah, you can argue that the Premiership shouldn't be involved, but they should just be, and I suspect they are. In fact, I suspect they're very well aware of this situation. I suspect that the EFL has probably come to them and said, look, we're going to have this situation, it's pretty terrible. I don't know what they say to them. Probably not our problem. That's probably what I'd say in their situation. FIFA FA, was anyone paying attention? Probably not. Probably not, just cash the checks. Where do the fans stand? Well, I can only say we should all be looking at the example of AFC Wimbledon. Maybe that's the future of League 1, 2 and the Championship, if there is a complete meltdown and the finances spill out into League 1 and 2 and we see contamination there. We see clubs going to the wall like Bury did. Then I guess maybe we'll just see new teams come up from the non-league. Hopefully they'll not do the same thing. It does look like there's a mania in the Championship to get into the Premier League, and it seems to me that the thinking is it's all worthwhile building up the debt as long as you keep it under 100 mil. You know, because if you get into the Premiership, you'll get the 100 mil, you can pay it off, and then somehow miraculously you're going to stay up. I don't see how that follows, but that seems to be what people are doing. I guess if you get relegated, you still get the parachute payments, 90 million first year, probably another 50 million in the second year. So I guess if you do it, yeah, you can go back into the Championship with a nice little nest egg. If you didn't spend on players, you're even better off. And the thing is, Ipswich hit 100 million. They're still not in the Premiership. They're in League 1. I don't know how they get out of this. I guess there's got to be a way. But I don't know what it is. I think a lot of people are going to see their clubs shaken to the core. The real challenge for this season, it's not promotion. It's not even survival. Not as on a league scale. It's survival as existence. So I'm going to leave it there. It's depressing enough for me. Hopefully I'm wrong. Hopefully I'm wrong.